There are state and federal laws that require that every polling place be accessible to persons with disabilities.
And I know it gets frustrated. There's people out there right now that are saying, I couldn't get in my polling place. And they can say that they haven't been able to get in there for a long time, probably forever. And we're making changes now.
And those changes are being made in Erie County's 1,200 voting districts thanks to the untiring efforts of David Page, Director of the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities and Handicaps, and Tony Serra, former Executive Director of Erie County's Office for the Disabled.
What we're trying to do is develop a system in which, number one, we identify those places that are not accessible and maybe getting moved or changed. And two, that when they do move a polling place, that they move it to an accessible location. Those numbers, hopefully by the next election, will be close to 100%.
There are tens of thousands of people with disabilities in Erie County, as many as 135,000 persons with disabilities who are affected by inaccessible polling places. We're not talking just about people in wheelchairs. That's a small minority. That's about 1% of our disabled population. But we're talking about people with arthritis, people with heart conditions. Those are the majority of folks, people who have disabilities that are related to the aging process.
Another force to be reckoned with in the battle for voting accessibility is the Eastern Paralyzed Veterans Association, in which Michael Mercurio serves as the Assistant Director of Advocacy Programs.
We have a problem in Erie County, particularly in the Buffalo area. What happens is in the Northeast, the older part of the country, we're dealing with older buildings that were built without any kind of access in mind at all. Now, our job is to try to make these buildings accessible, or which is more important, to find an alternative polling site which is accessible, to try to take some of the cost burden away from making the polls accessible. As you can well imagine, it's a costly thing to do.
What kind of modifications would be needed to make it accessible for the handicapped?
It all depends on the location. As you can see here, it took a very small ramp to basically open the building up to us in terms of voting. Other places it requires a little bit more extensive work, and then other places it requires just to move the polling place. And we don't recommend that you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars changing a building when there's a accessibility building right next door.
There is a Senior Citizens and Disabled Persons Accessibility Voting Act of 1984 that requires that every polling place be accessible for federal elections. There is a state law that requires that polling places be accessible, but it's easy to get waivers. There are such large loopholes in those laws that it's easy to get a waiver. And that's not to say that we're not doing great things here in Buffalo. We have 243 polling places, of which 72%, more than 160, are inaccessible to people with disabilities. We're working hard to change that, and the Board of Elections has been extremely cooperative, but we've got to do more.
We've got legislation from both federal and state that have had legislative intent to make the polls accessible by 1990. We're looking forward in Erie County to making our presidential election, at least in the city of Buffalo, to be over 60% accessible and better than 90% in the county itself.
We asked Richard Robinson, the regional administrator for the Eastern Paralyzed Veterans Association, why not settle for absentee ballots?
It is one way, and there are those that would prefer absentee ballot. But amongst our membership, we found that we're talking about a group of young men who were athletes and scholars and workers who were drafted into service or joined service to fight for their country and fight for the right to vote. And one of those rights is to be out amongst society. That's very important to our membership, is to be a part of society. And going to the voting booth is #1 priority. And we would prefer to do that.
Filling out an absentee ballot, you don't have the same sense, the same feeling, that same chill that runs up and down my spine every time I pull that lever. You know, that's the most American thing we do. In any democracy, voting is the most fundamental right.
Gregory Kulwicki, the National Service Officer for the Eastern Paralyzed Veterans Association, not only voted from his wheelchair, but also was elected councilman in the town of Elma.
I saw a picture of your wife on roller skates, and you're going a mile a minute in that chair. Tell us about it. And what happened is that when we first initially started to go door to door on the campaign trail, my wife had to walk alongside of me, and we couldn't cover as many houses. So we said, we put her on the roller skates, and now what she did is she hung onto the back of the wheelchair. So inevitably, I was like pulling her from house to house.
Right now, you've got 145,000 people that are disabled that we've identified in Erie County. There's 210,000 people with arthritis of some kind that have been identified in the county. The frailty of age is going to get you. So sooner or later, you're going to join our fraternity, and you're going to need these provisions that we're talking about.
The right to vote runs this country. These are the things that make things move, and I think everybody wants to be a part of that. So those out there who are not disabled will be, perhaps someday, either through the aging process or an accident, God forbid, or whatever. And they have to look down that road also. I never thought I would be in a chair 30 years ago, but here I am, and I'm very aware of issues that I was not aware of 30 years ago. And I think it's good for everybody, whether they're disabled or not, to be concerned about their neighbor.